Labour has announced a new post-Brexit economic vision for the UK involving ambitious plans to make, sell and buy more in Britain. It seeks to build on the platform that the win in Batley and Spen has given them. We appear to be in the midst of a flag-waving frenzy. It's a patriotic face-off. Whoever loses is the treasonist. I'm joined now to talk about that by Brendan Chilton, who is Director of Labour Future, a campaign which aims to reconnect the Labour Party with its traditional heartlands, and is also a local councillor in Kent. So, is this the plan to do that, Brendan?
Well, I think it's a starting point. Certainly, it's good to see the Labour Party finally starting to develop some policy areas, particularly on the economy, where we've been very weak. But before we can start to sell more and buy more things made in Britain, we need to make more things in Britain. And to do that, we've got to re-examine the way our economy works, explore how we can get investment increased in those areas that have been left behind from globalisation, revive manufacturing, and really, really deal with the skills and training issues in this country, which, frankly, all governments for many, many years have failed to deal with.
Well, that seems like a long-term plan, which is not really what's being presented here, is it?
Well, at the moment, the UK manufacturing sector, things we make in this country, accounts for around 10% of our economy. Now, if we're going to get that up and make more in Britain, we've got to deal with the long-term challenges facing the country. And this is not going to be an issue that's solved overnight. We've got to ensure, for example, that our rate of exchange is more competitive, so investment is profitable here in the UK. We need to examine our current planning laws to make it easier and faster to get new plants built so we can make more things in British factories. We need to look at the whole question of infrastructure and the supply chains around our industrial sector at the moment, because let's be honest, a lot of our infrastructure is creaking. So there's a whole agenda here that needs to be satisfied before we can start to make more things here in the UK. But I'm pleased Labour has started this discussion. We need to see what more meat they're going to put on the bones of this policy, but I think it's a good start and I want to see more from it.
People that have tuned in without knowing who it is I'm speaking to might have guessed that you were actually from the Conservative Party, because everything that you just said sounds like their kinds of policies: cutting red tape, slashing planning laws, all of these things that make sense for business, for them to improve their bottom line, but is actually the antithesis of what I thought that Labour stood for.
No, not at all. The Conservative Party have said they've got some broad levelling up agenda. Well, no one's quite sure what that looks like yet, and the government haven't really spelled out in any detail how that's going to work. The Labour Party have started today with a policy of saying they want to make more in Britain. Well, the issues facing the manufacturing sector in this country are around those I've outlined, namely getting our infrastructure up to scrap. I don't think that's really a Conservative policy or a Labour policy. It's just something that's got to be done. Secondly, dealing with the questions around the long-term skill shortages in this country. That's, again, not really a Conservative issue. We've seen the Conservatives, of course, keep people out of school and university this year, in part due to the pandemic and due to the other measures they've taken in respect of distancing. They've spoken about the need for us to look at our competitive exchange rate to ensure that we can make investment in the UK manufacturing sector profitable again. And that was something that Labour governments pursued right the way up until Blair, really. And, you know, those are the areas we need to look at if we are going to make more in this country, because at the moment it is far cheaper to produce cups and saucers, Christmas lights, freezers, fridges abroad and import them than it is to produce things here.
Yeah, that's right. But surely that's an argument for just letting that go and for us to concentrate on the kind of things that we have been doing since the manufacturing base in the country collapsed. Services. I mean, we do really good and profitable work with finance and insurance and accounting and all of that stuff. That's what we've been specialising in.
That's true. We do have the majority of the British economy is a service-led economy. But what that has led to is an over-concentration of jobs and well-paid jobs in the cities. And in the small towns and villages and northern and sort of midland parts of this country, we've got areas that have just been desolated. Now, when you look at the areas in those parts of the country where they've suffered, it is due to deindustrialization. But let's look around Europe. Germany still has a thriving industrial sector, and they don't just produce, the high-end things that we see on our roads, cars and lorries and things like this. They also produce pressure cookers and toasters and kettles. Now, we've got to ask ourselves, if the Germans can do it, why can't we? We've got similar levels of standards of living. We've got similar economies. We're both in the continent of Europe. Both of our workforces are relatively at the same level of education and skills. So why can the Germans do it, but we can't? And the reason the Germans are able to have that manufacturing strength in Europe is because their government have actively ensured that investment is profitable in Germany, that they've got good technical education and training in Germany to get people into those sectors, and also they've ensured that the planning and regulatory system, which I don't think Germany would be described by anyone as some sort of right-wing conservative system. They're quite a centrist country. They've used the skills and training agenda, the regulatory agenda there, to ensure their manufacturing sector stays strong. Now, in Britain, we've just said, oh, to hell with it, goodbye manufacturing, and we've just focused entirely on services, and in particular financial services, which has led to the position we're in today, where, yes, that sector is strong, but actually quite a lot of our country is falling behind in quite a serious way.
Yes, if this was to work, though, it would be a bit like trying to turn around a supertanker, wouldn't it? While at the same time changing the supertanker into a speedboat. We'd be repurposing the whole of not just the economy, not just in where the country's economy is facing, but also completely changing education from the bottom up.
Well, absolutely. I mean, it's not something that can happen overnight. If you want to level up, as the government says, and if Labour's right and they want to see more things made here in the UK, we're not just going to be able to transform the economy overnight. This is going to take a new consensus among the parties that treats manufacturing and technical training and skills in the same way that we treat academic training and the service part of the economy. If we want to have a more balanced economy, we do need to undertake such measures, because at the moment around 70 to 80% of our economy is service-based. As I said earlier on, around 10 to 12% of the economy is manufacturing-based, and the remaining is agricultural. Now, if we want to level up, we've got to rebalance the economy, which means undertaking some of the measures I've described. Now, as you say, it will be like trying to turn around an oil tanker. It's going to be hard work, but the government has said they want to do it. The Labour Party is now moving in this direction as well. So let's hope that we can get to a position where both parties develop that new consensus around how our economy should be run, particularly post-pandemic, where we want to see supply chains that are shorter for security reasons, so we're not having such a negative impact on the climate through global supply chains as well, and where we actually say this country can do better, it can make more, just so long as we pursue those policies that I've outlined that get the economy growing.
There are two things that occur to me, though, that might mean that it's an uphill struggle. The first is that this country is not synonymous with top-quality, high-end engineering products for consumers. You think, if you want a really great washing machine, for instance, then you don't buy British, with the greatest respect to the British manufacturers. The other thing is, if you're not one of the fortunate well-off, and you aren't in the market for that kind of thing, then what you actually want is well-made, cheap things. But I don't think that what and the Labour Party is proposing will meet either of those markets, because our labour costs are way more than they are in China, for instance, and the Far East, and presumably Africa will start to catch up as far as its manufacturing goes, because their labour costs will be significantly less than ours. So what kind of market is it that we would be aiming our products at?
I think the first thing to say is I don't think anybody's advocating the sort of industrialisation that we were akin to in the past, with smoke-filled factories employing tens of thousands of men and women. No one can imagine those days coming back. And of course, as you said, labour costs in other parts of the world are a lot cheaper. But as their economies grow, and a growing middle class is emerging in China and indeed in parts of Africa, those countries themselves and those countries within Africa will also have the same problems we're having now. So how do we do this? The big issue at the moment is investing things that really grow the economy in this country are mechanisation, power and energy. Those are the areas that really contribute in terms of innovation to grow the economy and get a high rate of social return. And all these figures can be found on the IMF page and on the World Bank page and indeed on the Bank of England. At the moment, we don't invest anywhere near enough in these areas. Now, if you outcharge that to the rest of the world, at the moment, the costs are extremely high in the UK. If you were to ensure that our currency was more competitive, namely that when we outsource those costs to the rest of the world, they're at a more competitive rate for manufacturers in this country, what we'll then be able to do is not get our manufacturing sector up to around 50, 60% of GDP, but to grow it at a reasonable level over a sustained period of time, so that within 5 to 10 years, instead of having a manufacturing sector that's around 10% of GDP, we come up to around the level where Germany is, which is around 20%, and Japan, 20%. And of course, as we do that, and as we have innovation in the sector, British products and the quality of British products will improve as suppliers improve their own services and their own equipment and machinery, etc., to produce those goods. It's the natural thing that happens in a market.
Right, OK. So let's talk about the money that the Labour Party depend on and whether that will continue to flow if policies are pursued that are perhaps centrist or a little bit on the right for the Labour Party. I mean, the Unite Union are probably going to insist that Keir Starmer maintains his pledge to carry on with some of the policies that Jeremy Corbyn was espousing, nationalisation and so on, which doesn't really fit with what Keir Starmer is saying now.
Well, I think at the moment, of course, Keir Starmer came into the leadership of the party at the start of this pandemic, and the usual politics of red versus blue has sort of been suspended for the past year. And so we are at a point now where we're coming out of this pandemic, hopefully, and Keir Starmer's got to now put his imprint on the Labour Party, and he has a huge mandate from the membership. He was elected just over a year ago. We've had a difficult year, obviously, because there's obviously been a vaccine bounce for the government, but Keir Starmer is the leader of the Labour Party, and he has a mandate to change the Labour Party. Yes, individual policies in our manifesto in 2019 were popular, but taken together, they were wholly rejected by the British electorate. We went down to our worst defeat since the 1930s. And so I think Keir's leadership is a mandate for change. And that means, yes, examining some of those policies and examining the way we do politics to try and reconnect with the British people. And if we don't do that, we won't ever win again. So I think while some in the Labour movement, some in the trade unions and, some groups within the party might not be happy, if we want to form a government again, we have to change.
OK, one final question. Reconnecting with the British people, buying more British products, selling more and making more British products. It looks a bit like we're in a flag-waving competition here.
I don't think so. I think one of the things that's become quite apparent during this pandemic is that when we saw, for example, at the beginning where, we were dependent on China for our PPE equipment and having to send planes to Turkey to pick up ventilators, the British people went into this pandemic, we followed the rules, but we were wholly dependent in some cases on things like this coming in from abroad. Now, it was an emergency, and I appreciate, that the government didn't necessarily expect a pandemic to arise. But when a country is in crisis, we should be in a position in our own economy, domestic supply, to produce things to meet our needs, and we weren't. And so in terms of making more things here in the UK, I think that's good. We should be using more British steel, in British submarines and not getting the French to do it. We should be ensuring, as Rachel Reeves said, that when we got our new passports, they were made in Sunderland and Gateshead and not outsourced to the continent. I don't think that's necessarily a flag-waving gesture. I think that's actually saying we've got the skills here, we've got the people here, let's build it and make it here. And of course, to make that successful in the long term, let's change our economy so it's profitable to do so.
OK, Brendan, good to talk to you. Thank you for that. That's Brendan Chilton, who is Director of Labour Future. So what are your thoughts then on this new policy? It does seem to be a reaction to the success that the Tories have had lately in vigorously waving the flag, in appending the flag to practically everything that they say and do. They've announced a new post-Brexit economic vision for the UK involving ambitious plans to make, sell and buy more in Britain. Does that sound like a sensible policy, or is it just, as I said, a reaction to this flag-waving frenzy that we're seeing on the Conservative benches? We're talking about the new policy announced by Labour. This is their new pitch to make, sell and buy more in Britain, which sounds like a pretty good idea, I suppose, until you start thinking about the problems with that. One of which is, isn't it sensible for countries to specialise? I mean, factories don't make everything, because then everything would be enormously expensive. Factories make one thing over and over and over again. So isn't it actually more sensible for a country to specialise in certain things? I mean, if you want an excellent washing machine or a kettle or a car or so on, you go to a German company or a Japanese company. If you want to hide your profits from the taxman, then you come to the City of London. It's what we do, the financial finagling racket. So is that perhaps, as we've carved that out for ourselves, we are known, we are synonymous with the services industry, then maybe we should stick with it. But is it actually important to you that the Made in Britain is stamped on the things that you buy? And if it is, why haven't you bought more of them? I mean, things are available that are bought, that are made in this country, but what they tend to be is either not made very well or, probably more likely, expensive compared to what you could buy that's made in China, for instance, or Japan, or maybe even Germany. It's because they make more of them. We make perhaps more specialised things. I mean, like, I don't know, shoes, for instance. You buy British shoes and or top quality British shoes, and you're looking at an enormous amount of money, which is why we don't buy them in any great number. We buy shoes that are made in Taiwan and China and so on, because they are much, much cheaper. It seems to be what the British consumer values above all else is a low price on the things that we buy. So is this policy going to go anywhere? Do you think it's actually intended to go anywhere, or is it just a response to the vigorous patriotic flag waving that we've seen from Boris Johnson? 0345 6060 973. Brighton. Hello, Joe.
Hi, Nick. I think it's a good start. Margaret Thatcher, when she was doing all the different agreements with the European Economic EEC at the time, she did say to the German Chancellor that she wasn't interested in manufacturing, that services was the direction the country should go. But as you can see, with certain banks always promising that they're going to pack their bags overnight every time the British government were not likely to sign a Brexit deal, I do not think services alone is a good way to base your economy. And the whole point of stripping the manufacturing sector of Britain was to destroy labour from having enough money from the union, which were in most of these manufacturing plants across the country. So that was the intentions of the Tory party, to privatise, plus she had an American advisor, Margaret Thatcher, privatise, and it became the Commission party. That's all the Conservatives are. They don't care about the country as long as they can get cut. That's all they're worried about.
Okay, so would you be more likely to vote for the Labour Party then?
I'm in the centre. I'm in the centre. The problem with Labour. Labour don't focus on the towns they represent. They're focusing on trying to please as many interest groups as possible and not concentrating on trying to, deal with the local problems and then worry about the rest of the world once they've dealt with the local problems. And it's not being selfish, it's just that if you're going to introduce more people into a community and the community already is under its strain, it's not going to work. And that's called Lincolnshire. And that's called other parts of the country what are under strain. So, in Brighton, we're very liberal, but we're not, and we're welcoming to everybody. And lots of people around the country would love to live there, like in Bristol. But we tend to be digital down here. We tend to be digital and banking. And, all the manufacturing's moved out, which was Sony Ericsson, I think at the time, Ericsson. We have nothing to show for it. And we do need to get back into manufacturing.
You have nothing to show for it in Brighton. It's one of the richest towns in the country.
More than digital and banking. I mean, all the manufacturing is dead along from Brighton all the way down to Kent. I mean, look at the beginning of the pandemic, all the old businesses were closing down because they couldn't export anymore.
But Brighton is a very vigorous and well-off town.
That's right, from banking and digital services. That's what I'm saying, from banking and digital services. We haven't got no manufacturing. And if you're going to grow a country, you need to have manufacturing. And one thing I will say to you, Nick, I know we don't like looking at the internet because, there's a bed of misinformation. But there are quite a lot of economic groups that have put our economy within 10 to 12 years in 10th place. Even Vietnam will overtake us because of manufacturing. So that just tells you we need to get into manufacturing, or we're going to have countries like Pakistan and Vietnam outgrow us.
Right. Well, it depends. I mean, if we make more money from services, from banking, from insurance and accounting, and all of that, then they wouldn't be outgrowing us at all. They in fact would be doing all the dirty fingernail jobs that we don't wish to do. I mean, is that not actually better for the consumer to have places that the labour costs are lower to do all of that stuff, that labour-intensive work, so that we can buy things more cheaply? Because that is what concerns the consumer, as I said, more than anything else, is the price. If there are two apparently identical things on a shelf, and one is $9.99 and one is $19.99, and the more expensive one is made in Britain, well, you know which one you're going to buy. We're familiar with which one we'll choose because we've been choosing the cheaper one for our entire lives. It's one of the reasons that we don't make anything here anymore, is because other countries can produce things of a similar quality but at a much cheaper price. Essentially, the ruination of the manufacturing industry in this country is our fault because of the choices we make as a consumer. But there is something to be said for making more in Britain and buying more things that are made here, and that is the sort of marquee policy that Labour is announcing. Does that make it more likely that you would vote for Keir Starmer? Is this something the kind of thing you would like to hear him say? Because he's been given a springboard by just squeezing a win in Batley and Spen when people were expecting him to lose. It was quite surprising to wake up that morning this week and see that what you had expected to happen hadn't occurred. So it's one of those moments perhaps that sort of changes the narrative. Is he now not the loser that he was being painted before? Can Keir Starmer, with this kind of policy, sort of wrapping himself in the flag just a little bit, is that the sort of thing that you would want to hear from a revivified Labour Party? The Labour Party, who have now announced a Make, Sell and Buy More in Britain campaign as a sort of an addition, a springboard from their Batley and Spen win. And I'm asking, is that the kind of thing that you would want to hear from the Labour Party? And would such a thing make you more likely to vote for Keir Starmer? This says, we could have had British PPE last April, but our government turned down several companies' offers, says a leader. Yeah, that's what I understand as well. Perhaps they made the tragic mistake of not being donors or friends to the Conservative Party. This says, this isn't new. There was a campaign in the 1960s called I'm Backing Britain. It came with its own song with the same name, says Joe. Yeah, I do recall that. I'll sing that for you later. Let's have Shetland Islands. Kerry.
Yes, good evening, Nick. First-time caller to yourself. I usually phone about trans issues, because being a trans activist here on Shetland. But since I got my degree in economics 45 years ago, it just seems that the world hasn't really changed since the 70s. And to be frank with you, I lived in Canada for many years, and I look back at Britain at the time when the miners' strikes were on and all that going on. And to be frank with you, I am sick and tired of listening to supply-side economics to about growth. You know, when I was born in 48, the world population was 3.5 billion people. Today we're looking at over 7 billion, coming up to 8 billion. By the end of this century, we're looking at 10, 11 billion people, perhaps.
Yeah, but surely that's not Keir Starmer's fault, so let's stick to the point.
No, it's not his fault, but what he needs to know is the fact that he needs to think about sustainability. Never mind manufacturing in this country. We're very good at services. We're very good at technology in this country. Yeah. We don't have to particularly try to reinvent the wheel again in manufacturing, because it didn't work before and it's not going to work again.
Well, surely the green economy will be dependent, as we know, on manufacturing. I mean, we need to manufacture wind turbines and solar panels and all of the rest of it.
Well, let's manufacture them more so than ever. But we don't need to keep manufacturing other goods that Japan make in particular. I mean, I bought a lovely AV surround sound system. I won't mention the name of it. And when you buy something these days, it goes wrong after 4 years. It had to be recycled. I mean, they make things these days, Nick, to go wrong. We know that from fact.
But while we don't know it for a fact, it is true that things do tend to go wrong. If you bought an AV system that breaks down within 4 years, then you probably should have bought a better AV system, Kerry. You know, for the benefit of the environment. But I appreciate the call. Thanks for that. 0345 6060 973. Back to Brighton. Paul this time. Paul.
Hi there, Nick. Yeah, no, I'm trying to take in what that guy says, sort of more empty promises and platitudes, basically stating the obvious, that obviously we would like to be making more things. We'd like to be doing more manufacturing, but obviously for straightforward economic and reasons and the definition of industry, which is that it's moved to other countries where they do it better and specialise in it better, and they make it cheaper.
Exactly, cheaper, yes. I mean, is it actually that important to buy British? Because if it was, then there would be more companies that manufacture things for us to buy here, but we've chosen not to buy them.
Well, it would be good, but the thing is, just by saying it doesn't mean it's going to happen. People, companies and people are not going to just follow what someone else says. They want to buy cheap and the quality and the production. You know, we now have globalised production and globalised economies. So things have moved to different countries where those countries and companies make things better and cheaper. So I think it's basically easier said than done. And it would obviously, a lot of this manufacturing, to get it back to Britain would take many years.
It'd be a long project. Yeah, it'd be a long project.
Yeah, it's not going to. And the whole thing with the PPE thing, I mean, again, you think, something so simple. Why couldn't we get it here? Well, because we just didn't make it here. We didn't have.
It wasn't precisely right. It wasn't necessary for us to make it here. It's a very low-cost item that is highly dependent on its price because you buy so much of it. And we apparently either were unwilling or unable to make it at the kind of price that we could buy it from abroad. I just wonder if we're going up the wrong street here. It sounds like a great idea. Let's buy British. Yes, that's a patriotic thing to do. But we've had the choice to buy British in the past, and as consumers, we're not very patriotic in that regard. We are more concerned about the cost of things to us personally at that moment. Of course, if short-term pleasure is where we're at. Long-term, it might not be beneficial to the country to choose to buy things that are made in Germany and Japan and China and so on. But nobody's really very interested in the long-term. Short-termism is what drives us. But it's, as a policy, as a sort of a headline grabber, it's quite good. Particularly as we appear to be a country in something of a patriotic frenzy at the moment. Make, sell and buy more in Britain is Labour's new policy. And I wonder if it appeals to you, whether you think it's possible, whether you would choose to buy things that are made in Britain and be prepared to pay more for them, or whether this is actually just whistling in the dark. 0345 6060 973. Southampton. Hello, Simon.
What a joke. Have you got your soundboard there? Because right now, the boring would be a quite appropriate...
Right, no, the soundboard takes a break on Sundays.
Yeah, unfortunately. Right, this is ridiculous. This is absolutely ridiculous, okay? If I want to...
Is it, though?
Yeah. Yes, it is. People... There's only a certain amount of people that actually would care, right? Now, if stuff's being made here and you buy it here, it's undoubtedly going to be more expensive than getting it on Amazon, okay? So, we all going to get some money as well?
Well, I suppose that's a good point, and you raise an interesting example, Amazon, of course. Now, people decry the death of the high street and the shops that we used to enjoy. John Lewis is in trouble. Debenhams is gone, as far as I'm aware, and all the shops that defined our high street, they're pretty much gone, and they've been replaced by charity shops. Now, who did that? We did. You can blame Amazon all you like, but it's us as a consumer that chose not to put on our hat, coat, scarf and gloves, go down to the bottom of the road, get the bus, go to the high street, choose what we want, finger the goods personally, and walk out the store with them in a bag. No, we have chosen to buy from a corporation that exists as a cloud of mist for tax purposes. Who even knows where they are? They're here, there and everywhere, baby. And we know that, and yet we buy pretty much everything that we used to get on the high street from Amazon now. That one bloke who has become the richest man in the world. Not because of his evil plan to take over the planet, but because us as a consumer have chosen that, for ease, convenience, and predominantly price, we've chosen specifically to ruin the high street while we're complaining that the high street is ruined, as though we don't think that the two are in any way connected. So that's a perfect example, I think, of what's why there is no manufacturing in this country anymore. And you can lay some of the blame at Margaret Thatcher, of course, but most of the problem is us as a consumer. We're not really interested in whether it's made in Britain anymore. We're interested in saving 10 pence. So I wonder if this is actually going to go anywhere, or he's just scoring patriot points, perhaps. If it gets a couple of votes, maybe it's worth it. We're talking about Labour's new policy. Their announcement is that they intend to make, sell and buy more in Britain, should they ever get the chance to be in a position to do so. Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves also said that Labour would ensure far more public contracts were awarded to British businesses as opposed to handing them to overseas firms. Of course, you'd have to have those British businesses in the first place to be able to do that. And the question I'm asking is, A, is that the kind of policy you want to hear from Keir Starmer? Is that exactly the sort of thing that he should be saying? And B, would you be prepared to spend a little bit more, perhaps, on buying British than getting what might look like the exact same thing but made in China? This message says, Britain will be a disaster as a result of Brexit. Anyone who thinks that the British people will be willing to pay more for substandard workmanship are crazy. Well, okay. This says, it's all well and good saying that Britain should be making vast amounts of products, but this takes heavy industry. The thing that Labour are now calling for, but at the same time wanting to be a green vote. We all have to be real and realise that Britain will not survive if we try to reach these goals without big industry. And this says, if something is made in Britain but by a Japanese or a German business, it's not buying British. Surely we need more British brands. Yeah, see, well, that's another thing. I do think that it's down to the consumer. It's the consumer's fault that there aren't that many British products anymore. And what you do perceive as being British usually aren't. I mean, if you go to your food cupboard and you pull out things that you think are, real, true, honest British products, almost certainly they're made by foreign firms. It's called inward investment, and it's something that the Conservative Party are dead keen on because they think it makes the, it's a global Britain and so on. But what it actually is, usually, is foreign companies buying up what you would perceive of as being British businesses. We don't own anything anymore. Everything that you think is a true British product or company is almost certainly owned by a foreign organisation, or we have tenuous links with this country and the head office will be abroad somewhere. Some light tax regime. Edinburgh. Hello, Marion.
Oh, hi. I didn't think I was on yet. Hi. Right. So, back to your question. Sorry. I would just say I think there's a little bit of flag waving going on with this policy. Probably a little bit of pointing out how Brexit screwed things up. Sorry, I was just moving here. But I think he's not necessarily completely off kilter with this, actually. But he needs to be, he's not talking about kettles and toasters. I mean, that wasn't clear in what he said. But I think if he starts talking about things like green industries, technology, stuff like that, make things like that here, that's got to be the only way ahead. The focus is wrong. I think the sentiment is fueled by a bit of flag waving, but it's probably not off, but it's not right. And your other guy, somebody mentioned, a few people have mentioned that, finance and digital services, that sort of thing, let's focus on that. I have been doing that from nowhere near London for a couple of years now, most of. My friends have been doing it from Greece. The location of the finance and digital thing doesn't need to be physically in the UK.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's really the focus. We need to start building green technologies and our science and tech stuff. I mean, look at the stuff that our guys were doing with all the genomic research and things like that. I mean, we've got to do that. Yes, we can buy kettles and toasters, but I don't know. That might take a bit of time to work on. Right. But I think the other one, just one more thing was the infrastructure. So things like steel and stuff like that. We've got to start building our own things. Infrastructure, our own companies.
Countries do put great store in having their own steel, their own sort of national steel industry, because of everything that gets made requires steel usually. But we seem to have tried that and serially failing in making a go of it. But for the for the defence of the country, for the protection of the nation, it is quite important to have your own steel industry. It's just that it seems that it requires government intervention and propping up with public money to make a go of it. And as for those technology jobs, you say that you're doing yours from Edinburgh. If COVID has shown us anything at all, it's that unless you are physically tied down to a machine in a factory, you can go and do your job pretty much anywhere you like, particularly those technology jobs. So I wonder if that's a false route to be going down, to concentrate on high-tech jobs, digital media, things like that, because they can be shipped out of the country very, very easily. Somebody can just close their laptop and get on a plane and be somewhere else but do the same job. So perhaps that is part of their thinking, that if we make more in this country, it's much more difficult to move a factory than it is somebody's computer. Thanks, Marion. Let's have Manesh in Hounslow.
Oh, hello, Nick. It's an interesting debate. I think Sir Keir Starmer is barking up the wrong tree here. It makes tremendous sense what he's saying, and it's a fantastic idea in a ideal world. However, in practice, it's not going to work because of the hindrances that we've got. And if you look at our buying patterns and our spending history, it's evolved to such a state that if you're going to gamble and rely on the British people buying British products, I think you're definitely barking up the wrong tree. And, moreover, if you look at it, it's too general. I mean, I think you need to be specific and focus on the parts of the industry which we are good at production. And if you look at our education sector, we're great. If you look at the new technology, we're great. If you look at pharmaceutical products, we are superb. And if you're going to get into actually physical manufacturing of products, the days of making furniture and steel are over in this country, I think, because we've got minimum hourly rates here, which we cannot compete against the rest of the world. So we need to focus on things like wind turbines, battery power, solar power, new technology where we feel, we've got the expertise. But the problem we've got here with Keir Starmer using this as a campaign winner, the rewards are so far away. Yeah. It's impossible. And this is not going to be a vote winner, I'm afraid, unfortunately.
Well, I think you're probably right there. I mean, if we aren't to rely on foreign skilled workers, then we're going to need a revolution in education as well. Because you can't just create jobs and expect people to retrain from being, bricklayers to being film directors, for instance, or panel beaters to being wind turbine engineers. You get to a certain age and it's very difficult to retrain somebody to do a highly technical and complicated job. You need the training to start at a very early age. And so I think you're right. The sort of lead time for the benefits for this are really quite long. And as I mentioned before, we're as a species, we're not really very interested in long-term benefits. We want short-term pleasure, and we want it now. Thanks for that, Manesh. Basingstoke, Daniel.
Hello there.
Hello
I've
there.
definitely got to say you are definitely a pro-Labour Party fan, but that's another argument entirely. It's all great and wonderful coming out saying buy British. Unfortunately, you can't make products in Britain at the same commercial cost as you can in the Far East. And the problem you've got is the big retailers in the UK that buy these products, the buyers that actually buy them, are too petrified of buying something that the British public won't buy, that they will never put on the shelves, a product that's made in Britain. And until that becomes a factor that changes British habits, and i.e. the retailers themselves change their mental states to buy British, it will never happen.
Yeah, but
so
there's no point, Daniel, in putting a product on the shelf that people won't buy. What's the point of that?
But you're saying there's a demand to buy British and we want to create a demand.
No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying the opposite of that. I'm saying that there is no demand to buy British.
Exactly. But this is what Keir Starmer has completely missed. He needs to come out and actually, get the British retailers to buy in to putting British product on the shelf.
Yes, Daniel, again, there's no point in putting a British product on the shelf if the British people won't buy it because it's more expensive.
How do you know they won't buy it?
Because for history. All you have to do is look at the history of commerce in this country. We have serially refused to buy British. Why? Well, there was, in the 1970s, it was very badly made and completely unreliable. And then post that, it was more expensive than the exact same product that we could buy from Japan and China and Taiwan and all of these places. It's got nothing to do with the people that are buying... Excuse me, I'm going to cough. It's got nothing to do with the people that are buying products to place on the shelves in stores. They're only meeting the demand that we consumers are providing. It's not their fault; it's our fault. And I'm not a fan of the Labour Party. You don't know anything about me, Daniel. Coventry, hello, Pete.
Oh, good evening.
Pete.
Yeah, I think with the Labour Party, they ought to concentrate more on social housing and also the right to buy. You know, if you've got the right to buy, helping youngsters get on the platform of the ladder. But at the moment, the Boris and his friends have brought in the new powers that they're going for greenfield sites. You know, green space. To put housing around and that.
Right.
And if you look at the housing corporations that are coming onto site, I mean, say here in Coventry, where I worked at two companies, Peugeot Talbot, which is now a big, massive housing estate, and also Jaguar Daimler.
Right. Well, I'm sure these are the sort of things that the Labour Party would be for, but they're not really sort of marquee policies. They're not something that I think that at the moment they imagine will get the public's, all whipped up and excited, because we seem to be, like I said, in a sort of a flag-waving frenzy moment, and it's almost as though they don't want to be left behind in the patriotic stakes. So that really, I think, informs this make, sell and buy more in Britain. It sounds good until you remember that we used to have the opportunity to buy, sell and make more in Britain, and we refused to do that.